Welcome, Ames Chamber of Commerce members. This is Drew Camp, Vice President with the Ames Chamber of Commerce, here to do another interview with our state legislators. We're happy to welcome today Representative Dave Dio, who represents Nevada and some parts of eastern and northern and southern Story County. Representative, thanks for being with us today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Within your constituency, within the area you serve, what are some examples of some tax credit programs that have really been beneficial?
Well, I always like to first start out by talking about the fact that the earned income tax credit is actually the largest tax credit that we have. So a lot of the folks from the other side of the aisle don't want to talk about that, or they forget that when they start bad-mouthing tax credits, that actually one of the ones that they really like is the earned income tax credit, which is a tax credit that goes to people that are working, but their salaries aren't high enough, for them to make a really very good living, so they can get a deduction off their taxes. And it's beneficial because it might be a situation where, it helps with things like childcare and other expenditures, things like that. So that, since it's the largest, I think it's over $60 million a year that goes towards that. It's probably had the largest impact if you're just talking about general constituents. When you go down from the list from that, though, we talked about the housing tax credits. That's one of the ones that I think there's a benefit there. There's the historic tax credits, which we talked about before. One of the ones we haven't talked about, which is huge around this area, is some of the biofuel tax credits. That has a benefit for ethanol and biodiesel plants. REG is your name. So
especially what we just saw the federal government doing retroactive.
Yeah, so that's a huge benefit for this area. You've got, high-quality jobs programs. We've had a number of small businesses in this area that have benefited from the high-quality jobs program, which some of that is tax credits. With having the research park here, at Iowa State, the big bad guy as far as the tax credits is the research activities tax credits. But of course, we have businesses right here in Ames that benefit from that research activities tax credit. And there's been a lot of talk about that. I think it's when people talk about tax credits and wanting to eliminate them, that's usually the one that they actually mean. Is they don't really, the other ones they're not really that much interested in getting rid of. It's really this one particular one. And I think the reason why it sometimes gets a bad, gets a bad reputation is because, in essence, what we're doing is we've got some companies that maybe they have a large business here, but they sell out of state. And so because they sell out of state, they don't know Iowa taxes. And so in some cases, they will receive this research activities tax credit. And they actually receive a check from the state because they didn't have a tax liability. But the concern about getting rid of it is you've got some really good Iowa companies that benefit a lot by this, and the biggest one is probably Rockwell Collins in Cedar Rapids. And I happened to look this up in the last day or so just to double check on it. I didn't realize that Rockwell Collins has almost 10,000 employees here in the state. And I really do believe if you eliminated the research activities tax credits, they would leave the state, because it's a huge deal to them. And I don't know how those are really, really good jobs. That's a great employer. And you've got other companies like John Deere. There's a number of really good Iowa companies, that do benefits from these research activities tax credit. And I think there's some things we can maybe do to try and rein it in a little bit, but I don't think we want to go too far because you run the risk of potentially running some of those companies out of here.
Yeah, and one of the big things too is there are always, the vast majority of them are in our targeted industries, and then also they're really good corporate citizens too where they're located. So those are really big considerations as well.
Yeah, Iowa actually is probably more generous than a lot of other states, and I think there's some things we could do that would sort of maybe reduce the amount a little bit, But at the same time, there was some talk that those were growing. They were a few years ago, but I don't think that the level of spending on those research activities tax credits at this point is actually growing that much. Well, tax credits overall have actually dropped. The expenditure to the state for the tax credits overall in the last 2 or 3 years.
And I know Director Durham's really diligent about how she looks at those, looks at the ROI on those, and you know that well, having worked with her in the committee assignments on economic development approaches and such.
She is really good at working with these new companies that are looking to come here to the state to negotiate with them and getting what is the best deal for the state of Iowa. You know, she is really a tough negotiator with those companies, and we're not just handing these tax credits and economic incentives out like some other states basically have a set level, and they just say, well, if you qualify, you just get all of the money. You know, here in Iowa, it's actually a negotiation and part of a contract,
and it's largely based on the quality of the jobs too.
Yeah.
Here with Representative Beth Wessel-Kershell, who largely represents the southern part of Ames in her district. And what are some tax credit programs and forms of financial assistance that you think have been particularly beneficial to your constituents and largely the Ames community?
You know, I've been really disappointed in the reports that I've seen or the analysis that I've seen of tax credits. I don't ever feel that we get a good idea of the cost-benefit analysis. You know, if you look at the fiscal impact to the state right now in FY19, it's $375 million. Next year, it will be $501 million in tax liabilities. And we do not see the cost-benefit analysis in reports that we get, and at least thorough enough for me to be satisfied. I'd like to see more. I think you have a really good question here. I'm not sure I have a really good answer. I do know that the Earned Income Tax Credit is benefiting 9 to 10% of Story County residents, and I think that is a really important one.
And that's actually the biggest tax credit
Is it?
there. And then I know also obviously one of the ones that's talked about a lot too is research activities. Tax credit is a big one. We have a lot of people doing business throughout Ames and Story County research parks, largely is a concentration there. But one thing too, we always touch on is the fact, I know Director Durham, she's always committed to make sure that she speaks to those things. And I think there's actually conversations of having an outside analysis done.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I think we really need that. When we put that much money into it, we really need to see what the benefit is to Iowans.
And I think a lot of the times too, people appreciate the outside perspective of making sure that you have, in a lot of ways, they can see that as non-biased, so to speak.
Sure.
So that's something obviously. Senate President Pro Tem, Senator Jerry Baines. Senator, thanks for being with us here today.
It's my pleasure, Drew. I look forward to coming and talking to you.
Along those lines too, is anytime you look at income tax reform and talk about income tax credits come into conversation as well. But one of the things we wanted to ask you though is on a positive light, what are some tax credits and forms of financial assistance that you know your constituents have benefited from that the state provides?
Well, the biggest thing on tax credits, there have been energy tax credits, all those sorts of things, but our goal, very frankly, is to get a tax code where if the rates are low enough, those credits are not necessary. That would be on a broad-based, I'd like to see credits rendered so they're not, you and I shouldn't pick credits because that infers winners and losers. Somebody gets a credit, that influences them, somebody doesn't, it holds them back. So I don't think we should be in the business of picking winners and losers. I would like to see those credits disappear as we lower the tax rates.
Okay. Yeah, and one of the things we're always looking at is making sure we're looking at the ROI on those, is because we can speak to that, obviously.
Exactly.
We now welcome Senator Annette Sweeney, who represents Northern Story County, Eastern Story County, and all the way over towards Waterloo, Cedar Falls, and Dike, New Hartford. Senator, thanks for joining us here today.
Oh, you bet. This is always a fun time to get to be able to visit and also to hear input from other individuals about what we've got going on.
The next question is we kind of look at, within the income tax structure, you mentioned tax credits always get a lot of attention. So can you maybe look at the area you serve? What are some tax credit programs and some forms of financial assistance that may not be tax credits, things like TIF, tax abatement, that have been beneficial to your constituents?
With the TIF, it's been helping out our schools, helping out our local towns. I always go back to the parks in the towns, and also with some infrastructure. Radcliffe's been working on that pretty hard. And then we also have, with the tax structure, let's also look at USDA and what USDA can bring to the table. They have where we have low-income housing help. They also have where if you have a particular project that's going on in your town, they can help with that too. So it's not only tax structure, but we also need to look federally what's available to us.
Very grateful today to be with Representative Ross Woburn. He represents part of North Ames in the seat previously held by Representative Heddens, now Supervisor Heddens. Representative Woburn, thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you, and thanks to the viewers out there. It's great to be here.
What are some of the tax credit programs or financial assistance mechanisms, TIF, tax abatement, things along those lines, that have had the greatest benefit to your constituents?
Well, I just started looking at In fact, I just got the fiscal projections right here today. They've just been released for us, but certainly the earned income tax credit is something that supports our workforce and something we want to have available. The child and dependent care, tax credit, again, supporting families. The solar energy state tax credit, especially with Ames now making the large investment in the availability of solar that you can buy packs. In fact, I remember I've got to send mine in because I've donated it to Youth and Shelter Services, which is something you can do if you're not going to use the credit yourself. You can donate it to a nonprofit. I encourage folks to do that in the city of Ames. But those are some of the areas, and you already alluded to the importance of reviewing those. So I think where we're having effectiveness, we want to certainly continue those and look for that type of investment. But if there's some areas where if a business organization has a pretty strong base, what is our return on investment is what we want to be looking as we continue.
And ones, I'll just mention a few real quick that we work a lot with. Here is the high quality jobs program and everything that's kind of embedded. You can use some supplemental research activities, tax credits, and there's some different pieces with the potential for abatement and sales tax exemptions and refunds in that regard within that program. But that's a very important one. That's based on the quality of the jobs, the salary of the jobs within your labor shed. We think that's a very fair way to do it. And then you get the assistance based on the amount of those qualified jobs you're going to be creating, or retaining. So that's a really important one. We all use that a lot on our big projects. But then research activities tax credit, that is a refundable one. And that's one that gets a lot of attention as well because of the fact it's refundable. So there's a payout obviously coming from the state on that regard. But a lot of our companies here in the research park and throughout the community, obviously with our huge interest in vet med and ag and engineering and the renewable energy, the lines, just go on in some of our target industries. Those are things that we really use a lot of. And then also there's some of the angel investor tax credits. We have actually the first seed capital fund in the state within our organization, Ames Seed Capital. That's one that's very beneficial to people that are investing in those startup companies coming out of, whether it's Papa John, the SBDC, or the Startup Factory, things, Ag Startup Engine, all those different places. Those are really important to us. And then just those innovation credits as well as you move companies into the growth phase. Those are things that we really look at very closely. Those aren't the only ones, obviously, that we care about, but those are some of the ones that we have a very strong passion for.
Right.
And then tax increment financing. Having been the mayor of Iowa City, you know a lot about that because Coralville, Iowa City get talked about a lot with that, but we also know the value of TIF here in this community when you look at, say, infrastructure into the research park and things like that.
And the important thing about tax increment financing, you're right, as being a former mayor, and we were very judicious about the use of TIF. We made them short-term and wanted to have that reinvestment coming back into the community as soon as possible. In fact, one of the larger ones that we did, I believe it came off the books, got full tax value within 7 to 8 years, which provided $1 million for schools, for county, for city. So you don't want to, you want looking at return on investment. It's not return on investment 50 years from now. You want to have an impact as soon as possible with that. I want to go back to, I did take a tour of VetMed. I mean, I'm here in Ames, but with some other legislators around the state. Certainly, an investment was made there, and they've got some future building coming up. But that's just a invaluable asset that we have here, not only just for animal care, but in terms of the health of people. And the impacts that it has. So they've done some tremendous work down there, and they're crowded into a small space. And there's some places where they've got some water, some potential mold issues. And so it's important that we address keep that infrastructure up.
And the veterinary diagnostic, we were happy to help support that over the years as it got some appropriations from the state legislature. And I know that's a really big one, especially I just read an article today about how African swine fever continues to permeate throughout the, across the pond there, across the Pacific Ocean. So that's something that's very important to keep our eye on. I also wanted to mention too the fact with tax increment financing, for example, too, there's a couple of examples. Jordan Creek is one down in West Des Moines, and then Coral Ridge Mall, I mentioned that one specifically because that one recently came back on the tax rolls. And I believe it was only over $350 million in taxable valuation that went back onto the tax rolls, which is obviously hugely impactful for city, county, school district, every one of those, community college, every one of the taxing entities. So those are things. So I understand too, and Steve Shanker here, the city really is a big proponent as well of getting those back on the tax rolls as quick as possible. So those are just important points to make because you can have a significant growth. It can have a significant positive impact once it does get back onto the tax rolls. Right? Thank you, Ames Chamber of Commerce members, for watching. Please do come back and listen to the next audio interviews with our next few questions for our state legislators next week.